Hello and welcome to the PwC South Africa predictions for the 2016 budget. My name is Kyle Mandy and I'm the Tax Policy Leader for PwC South Africa. In this short video, I and some of my colleagues will share with you the highlights of what we expect to see in this year's budget. South Africa finds itself in the most turbulent of times. GDP growth has fallen to levels where recession is a real threat, inflation is rapidly increasing, interest rates are going up, unemployment levels are high and rising, tax revenues are falling, and pressures for increased government expenditure are being brought to bear from an increasingly restless society. All this while the rating agencies watch closely as the threat of a downgrade in the sovereign credit rating to junk status looms. Given these and many other factors, the 2016 budget promises to be by far the most difficult and challenging budget in the last 20 years. I hope that you will find the insights in this video useful and informative. The economy has struggled to perform during the current fiscal year, and growth forecasts have been revised downwards. This has put tax revenues under significant pressure, and performance in the last quarter of 2015 suggests that revenue collections will fall well short of the revised estimates in the medium-term budget policy statement in October. Those estimates were already revised downwards by 7.6 billion rand from the original 2015 budget estimate, and we expect further reductions of between 12 billion rand and 22 billion rand, depending on how the economy and revenue collections perform in the last quarter of the fiscal year. The result is that, in the absence of significant reductions in expenditure from that budgeted, which we don't expect, the fiscal deficit for 2015-16 is likely to be significantly above the budgeted amount and may well push the deficit to in excess of 4% of GDP. Lower forecast GDP growth for the 2016-17 fiscal year and the lower tax base off which growth in tax revenues will be driven will in turn mean that tax revenues previously forecast for 2016-17 will not be achievable without significant tax increases and will give rise to a funding gap. The shortfall in nominal tax revenues will be offset to some extent by higher than previously forecast inflation. However, we still expect the shortfall to amount to between 10 billion rand and 20 billion rand. We expect that the expenditure ceiling will be cut to some extent to alleviate some of the funding shortfall. However, the recent increases in interest rates and sovereign bond yields will result in increasing debt service costs and negate any reduction in the expenditure ceiling. We therefore expect a structural increase in taxes of between 10 billion rand and 20 billion rand in order to close the revenue gap. The question then arises as to where these tax revenues will come from. Keep listening for our views on this.
No change is expected in the corporate tax rate of 28%, although corporate tax revenues are expected to continue to be under pressure in 2016-17 financial year due to low economic growth. No increases are expected. Any increases will negatively impact on the competitiveness of South Africa's tax rates. The global trend for corporate tax rates is downwards and will not be in line with the stated intention to promote investment-led growth. According to the Paying Taxes 2016 study, South Africa's effective rate of tax on company profits is significantly above the global and regional averages. An increase in corporate tax rate will likely have a negative impact on economic growth and investment, as it is the most distortive of all taxes. It is therefore expected that any additional tax revenues required will not be derived from this source. The general fuel levy was increased significantly by 30.5 cents a litre in 2015 as one of the means of raising additional tax revenues. Given the need for additional tax revenues and that the retail price of petrol is only slightly above the price it was in Feb 2013, and the diesel prices at levels last seen in 2011. We foresee a strong possibility that the general fuel levy could again be used as a mechanism to raise additional tax revenues. An inflationary increase in the general fuel levy of approximately 15 cents a litre is a given. However, we foresee that the general fuel levy could be increased by as much as 30 cents a litre, which will result in additional tax revenues of approximately 6.5 billion. The Road Accident Fund levy was increased by 50 cents a litre in 2015 in order to support the RAF, an increase of nearly 50%. The RAF continues to experience cash shortfalls, and further increases in the RAF levy are therefore expected. An inflationary increase will amount to approximately 10 cents a litre. However, it is expected that the increase is likely to exceed this, and an increase of 20 cents a litre will not be surprising, particularly given the delays in the introduction of the Road Accident Benefit Scheme. We are expecting an update to be given on the proposed introduction of carbon tax. It is not expected that the carbon tax will be introduced before 2017 at the earliest. While a draft carbon tax bill was issued for comment in November 2015, consultations continues both with government and the Davis Tax Committee. With regard to other environmental taxes such as the plastic bag levy and incandescent light bulb levy and vehicle emissions, taxes were last increased in 2013. Although the revenues raised from these taxes are relatively small, they constitute a soft area for the raising of additional tax revenues, and it is possible that further increases in the tax rates will be introduced in 2016. The electricity levy is not expected to be changed in 2016, given the proposed reduction of this tax when the carbon tax is introduced and the already high cost of electricity.
Although there is arguably scope to increase South Africa's VAT rate, given the relatively low rate by international standards and the growing trend to increase taxes as a source of tax revenue globally, an increase in the VAT rate is unlikely at this stage given the political sensitivity thereof and the perceived regressivity of VAT. As indicated in the mini-budget, it is likely that VAT increase will only take place in the medium term if tax increases are likely to fund certain elements of National Development Plan, such as the NHI. Excise duties on tobacco and alcohol are perennial soft target for increased taxes. Smokers and drinkers can expect to see above inflation increases in these taxes. Sugar taxes are becoming increasingly popular globally as a means of reducing obesity and raising revenue from a negative externality. The 2016 budget may well contain an indication that the possible introduction of such a tax is to be investigated. However, the introduction of a sugar tax is not expected in the short term.
We don't think that base erosion and profit shifting will necessarily take center stage in this year's budget speech, but we would be very surprised if it's not at least re-emphasized. In the current environment that most of us call the post-BEPS era, the Minister is probably entitled to feel that corporate South Africa is sufficiently aware that National Treasury and SARS remain fully committed to implementing the BEPS action plan. Having said that, the Minister's speech should probably still include some reaffirmation of that commitment. So to place this in context, the final BEPS reports were released by the OECD in October 2015, and although further work continues, the focus has shifted now quite emphatically to implementation. So we could expect that some of these implementation-related developments will be announced in the 2016 budget. For example, compulsory transfer pricing documentation and country-by-country reporting. South Africa is also participating in the development of a global multilateral instrument, which will amend multiple double tax treaties to bring them in line with the BEPS recommendations. And this may also merit a mention in the Minister's speech. We might also see further refinement of our interest deduction limitations and our interest hybrid rules. Overall then, even though we don't expect the announcement of any major new BEPS proposals, corporate taxpayers should not underestimate the impact of ongoing implementation of the BEPS initiatives.
No significant changes are expected in relation to estate duty and donations tax at this stage. We also think it's unlikely that a recurring wealth tax will be introduced in the 2016 budget. The Davis Tax Committee has been tasked with researching wealth tax further, and it would therefore be premature to announce any significant policy changes at this stage.